Do you have a hard time sleeping at night because you're up thinking about Star Wars what ifs? I do. Well, introducing Manta Sleep, the sponsor of today's video. Do you ever need the perfect headwear for sleeping? Well, this is the answer. It's perfect for daytime sleeping, nighttime sleeping, naps. I love naps. Naps are the best. Manta Sleep is the perfect eye cover for sleeping, along with this very comfortable headwear that we have right here. It comes with Velcro straps so that you can easily adjust, especially if you have a fat head like me. You can also use these incredible eye covers, which also come with Velcro in case you need to adjust for your fat head like me. Aside from just the regular sleep headwear like this one, they also have a Bluetooth one, which you can use to listen to Star Wars what ifs, podcasts, rain, or music. Whatever you desire to go to sleep. Manta Sleep is incredible because of its ease of access, including the fact that it's just super comfortable. I literally cannot see anything. If I got up, I might walk into a wall. It is the perfect eye cover mask because it actually covers your eyes, and it does it comfortably. It is not painful, it doesn't hurt your head, it is very comfortable to sleep in. So use my discount code
PentyPatrol
for 10% off of your Manta Sleep mask. I highly suggest this one. This one's amazing. If you want to get the Bluetooth one so you can listen to me, even better. Anyways, special thanks to Manta for sponsoring today's video. Enjoy the story.
Hello.
Our story begins in a Republic medical bay inside Admiral Yularn's flagship, the Resolute. Anakin was sore, so unbelievably sore. His body was stiff and his eyes were heavy. Master Kenobi was joining him inside this medical room to check on him. Anakin needed to be ready soon. There were reports coming in about another attack on Christophsis. Senator Bail Organa was on the system, providing relief, and he was trapped in the capital. This relief mission was set to begin. It also was set to be the first time Anakin and Obi-Wan would meet Ahsoka. A battlefield may have not been the most apt place to bring a Jedi youngling, but this was war. Neither knew that the coming battle of Christophsis would forever change their lives. Yet Skywalker wasn't exactly feeling himself. The war had been going on for just a short couple of months by this point. Not only was it a struggle to fight and lose troops, but Anakin was losing more and more of his memory. What he found to be the most arduous part about combat was what little he experienced. Not to say that Anakin wanted to be present to watch his men die, but every day it felt like a part of him was missing. Some memories of his past started to become blurry, as if they were never really there to begin with. The most important of these memories to Anakin was his marriage to Padme on Naboo. When the war first started, following their secret ceremony, nothing really changed. He reflected on that gorgeous, warm day, and the calmness that surrounded them. It was his place to find peace, as he adjusted to the role of Jedi General. As more battles and skirmishes went on, those memories started to fade. Aside from the total trauma that came with war, he had lost both his mother and his forearm in the weeks prior to his loss of memory starting. Anakin struggled immensely internally as a result of this. What he and several other Jedi didn't know were the true effects of PTSD. This was a trigger for Anakin. It activated certain parts of his brain, forcing a switch to flip. It was a slow descent, truthfully speaking. Initially, he became slightly detached from reality. His mind would be swallowed into daydreams or confusion. Sometimes he'd be spoken to and have no recollection of the conversation. It wasn't just a mental struggle, but slightly terrifying as well. As someone who was about to enter his 20s, he was having trouble finding where he was. This was made exponentially worse by the frustration he started to feel over the loss of his memories, or the blur, as he referred to it, covering them. Anakin could see pieces of events, but they weren't easy to read. The marriage, in particular, which he would consider the best day of his life, was missing. He knew he had R2-D2 because of Padme, but he forgot that they exchanged the droids in their vows. That loss of memory plagued him in the field, while working on his starship, and even during training exercises. It was a constant nag, and he couldn't contact Padme about it, not because she wouldn't be understanding or wouldn't listen, but because he was embarrassed for having forgotten. It was such an important part of their ceremony, and to just forget about it in the span of a couple months was, in his mind, quite disrespectful. The mounting frustration transformed into stress. The war was no help to that at all. Perhaps having taken a leave of absence, or at least confessing to someone that he was feeling this way, would have helped him slow the progression of this mental turmoil, but he didn't. Anakin was both too prideful to tell the medic, and he was also too focused. It was a terrible combination for a brain that was struggling so badly. That leaves Anakin where he was now, a mind totally lost, a soreness covering his body, and a few others asking him where he had been. To Anakin, he had been sleeping inside of his quarters. He had a throbbing headache, which is why he was in there. What he didn't understand was his sudden burning in the muscles. He felt like he'd been beaten, and that didn't make a lot of sense to him because he was sleeping. He and Master Kenobi had been communicating for a short stint, apart from each other. Their plan was to rendezvous at Christophsis to assist Bail Organa, but Admiral Yularen informed General Kenobi of Anakin's situation. Obi-Wan would be present for the clone medic, helping Anakin lift the tunic over his head, revealing inflamed bruising across his ribcage, a dozen or so deep cuts across his left shoulder, and a bite mark down on his right hip, indenting the front of his thigh and part of his rear end. Anakin had also pulled a muscle on his left calf, yet no one knew where he had been. Admiral Yularen spoke quietly to Obi-Wan, just out of earshot from the injured Jedi Knight, informing him that Commander Skywalker requested a leave of absence prior to a communication update. According to Yularen, Republic High Command was trying to contact them, and he just disappeared. Anakin's vessel's tracker was turned off, and he disappeared into the surface of the planet they were over. One of the clone medics started looking through a list of known animals on the planet. He found a couple of carnivorous beasts, some of their physical descriptions matching Anakin's scars. He got into a brawl with a big cat breed, but with every single animal shown to Anakin, he didn't recognize any of them. The clones showed off some herbivores and omnivores just in case, as the medical droid and medic applied Bacta to his wounds and prepared a scan of his bruised ribs. He still had no memory of these animals, not seeing one in person at least. The clones turned to each other and then back to the window. Obi-Wan, as if on cue, walked in. He asked Anakin how he was doing, and he just shrugged. Truthfully speaking, was there any true way for Anakin to describe this? He didn't want to even admit it himself, but he was scared. Why wouldn't he be? There were scar marks across his body. He was in a fight with something that could have killed him, and he had no recollection of it. Certain events from his own past were missing, and per the clones' words, he had absolutely no head trauma. Even though he was in a total brawl, he had avoided a head injury, leaving the clones and the two Jedi even more confused. Obi-Wan was too concerned about his apprentice, and he told Anakin that before they engaged at Christophsis, he was ordering him to return to Coruscant. He'd informed the Jedi Council about this before he left. The thought, or the fear, was some sort of Sith hex. Ever since Anakin received that scar from the Dathomiri witch, Asajj Ventress, he hadn't been the same. Of course, the Force-fearing Jedi would come to the conclusion that something spiritual was wrong, rather than a mental health crisis. But alas, Anakin would agree to take a leave of absence, though he requested for the ability to take a shuttle for himself. Obi-Wan didn't want him to, but Anakin was just worried about hurting someone inside the ship. He didn't want to be a nuisance or to be a threat, especially in the case of this being a Sith trick. Obi-Wan thought briefly before allowing it. He didn't want Anakin to hurt himself, but if Anakin felt most comfortable taking this route, then there was no reason to increase the chances of Anakin losing his cool because of tension that didn't need to exist. R2 would be given the special command by Obi-Wan to make sure he got Skywalker back to Coruscant. The Blue Astromech had no problem taking orders. Anakin's controls inside the cockpit of the ship would be withheld from him, and R2 would pilot alone. Anakin, inside the bay of the shuttle, closed his eyes and tried to find peace. In the meantime, as they departed from the fleet and moved for Coruscant, the Battle of Christophsis would go terribly. Obi-Wan and the clones would get supplies to Bail Organa using their stealth ship, but they wouldn't do anything else. Yularen's fleet, even with 4 Venators, couldn't break through Admiral Trench's blockade. At least the people of Christophsis had enough supplies to fight another day. The Republic needed to wait for another opportunity to pounce on the CIS fleet, so that they could at least free the system from occupation. Anakin's trip through hyperspace would be a lot less eventful. He'd spread himself out across the seats and lie down. R2 would play him some holograms from the ceremony, and he smiled, recalling the memories presented to him. As he watched, he fell asleep, or at least he thought he was sleeping until he found himself somewhere else entirely. R2 was hung up to the ceiling of the shuttle bay. He wasn't damaged or hurt, but just tied up so he couldn't be a distraction. Anakin was lying next to a fire this time, and he was stuck inside a forest he did not know. His head was throbbing again, as it was before, but the injuries sustained from the previous battle with whatever attacked him weren't as sore. He felt his ribs, which ached the most. Everything else, like the claw marks or bite scars, were much less painful than before. He questioned himself. He looked at his surroundings, not seeing anything that looked familiar. His eyes scanned the natural beauty around him, but there was no sight of the shuttle, or R2. The droid was still strung up inside the ship, waiting for his master to return, and Anakin was somewhere he didn't know. It was truthfully frightening. He didn't know how he got here. It just felt like he fell asleep. His mind was turned off, but his body wasn't. It felt like a sick sleep paralysis, but far worse. There was a split inside of his head, withholding his current conscious self of Anakin from seeing what his other half's motivations were. He looked at the trees around him, pushing himself off the ground and looking for any sort of clues. The landscape was really densely covered. He could see trees and bushes, and that's about it. The fire he had for himself was nicely built. The warm glow kept his body heated in the cooler temperatures of the environment. He looked above himself, searching the tree line for a standout plant. When his eyes found it, he ascended it, climbing to the top and scanning the planet around him. Everything in eyesight at least. What he found was nothing revealing. He was all alone on an unknown planet, one completely covered in the darkness of night. As he got back to the forest floor, he checked his supplies. He had some food, some water, his lightsaber, but no communication device. Such a limited supply for a jungle investigation. He did, however, find his holopad. As he searched through it, he found nothing. The password used to keep this device locked wasn't something his other half knew or remembered because it was another person. So it was just here, leaving not a trace of evidence for Anakin to go off of to figure out what was happening. In his fright, he started to write down words, expressing himself outwardly into the holopad, hoping that these descriptors could be used to help him in the future. After covering the journal, he locked the device and put it away, before eating some food and going back to sleep in front of the fire. His body was much more tired than his mind, and eventually the body won out, putting him to sleep. When the sun rose on the mysterious forest planet, Anakin got up, as himself. He felt relieved, more than perhaps ever, that he was himself. He gathered his supplies and started his trek. He had to find R2-D2 somehow. Wherever his little astromech was, he'd find him. He knew he would. Well, about an hour into his walk, as he was walking, and actually consciously existing, he'd lose his function and Vader would appear, continuing the journey started upon their arrival to the system. On Coruscant, the Jedi Council pondered about Anakin's location. He was supposed to arrive at a certain time. The transponder showed R2 entering the system of Coruscant several hours earlier, before the ship stopped transmitting and the shuttle reportedly bounced out into hyperspace again. This was an eyewitness account from the bridge of a Venator defending the planet. The Jedi were confused. They couldn't get into contact with Kenobi because he was fighting a losing battle over Christophsis, so they started to try and diagnose the situation. Anakin's erratic behavior was clearly picked up by Qui-Gon Jinn, but even in that, Qui-Gon was communicative with the Jedi Council. Anakin, in his short stint as a Jedi Knight since Geonosis, had been very communicative. This specific behavior was not common for him. Maverick-like, sure, but completely radio silent, not so much. The Jedi were worried mostly that, aside from the hex that Obi-Wan believed was at play here, that the war was becoming too much for Skywalker mentally. The worst part is, the Jedi weren't totally wrong about this specific situation. They also just weren't fully right. The structure of the split personality disorder was born out of a post-traumatic stress disorder. Anakin losing his mother, his forearm, and several men in almost back-to-back sequential order reworked some of his brain chemistry. He was also slightly predisposed to have this condition because of growing up as a slave in a hostile environment like Tatooine. The threat of losing one's life every day was real. Watto could stop giving them proper living conditions at a moment's notice, or the Hutts could do something to strip people of their lives in one swing. It was a stressful life for a young slave growing up, and while Watto wasn't especially cruel, not to say he was good because he wasn't, it didn't make the situation any less detrimental to a child's brain chemistry. The Jedi hadn't considered this affecting young Skywalker during the war. They hadn't even really thought of how the war could change the lives of so many younglings and Padawans. They just knew that as Jedi, they needed to serve the Republic, because that's what the Jedi Order was supposed to do. This lack of consideration left them concerned with Anakin, rightfully so, but for perhaps the wrong reasons. As a result, the Jedi Council dispatched Master Kit Fisto to begin his search for Skywalker. A few knights were paired up and sent out into the galaxy to find him. There was also another concern, though it was the least likely scenario out of their initial beliefs. They worried that Anakin may have been captured by the Separatists. This led to them requesting for 6 commando squads to begin their hunt for Anakin as well. In total, about 32 Jedi and clones would be searching specifically for young Skywalker. Maybe their worries weren't in the right place, but they cared, and they wanted to protect Anakin. This was in all actuality kind of a special treatment. Back in the mysterious unknown system, Vader ascended the side of a temple and walked through a corridor that he broke open with the Force. His hand ripped bricks apart and his blue lightsaber crushed through materials in the way. Just as he entered a secret lair, his eyes flickered and he fell on the ground. The lightsaber in his hand flipped out of it and jumped across the floor as Anakin's eyes returned. His eyes fluttered as he gasped for air. Losing control while being awake was very terrifying. His fingers trembled on the ground and he felt the weight of his arm wobble, even with the support of his metallic hand beneath it. Anakin wrapped his metallic hand gently around his other hand to stop it from shaking. As his eyes searched the environment, he now found himself within. He turned back to see the light shining from the outside. Before he investigated the location he found himself in, or even attempted to grab his lightsaber, he moved to the mouth of the tunnel, noticing how at least 5 to 6 hours had passed based on the location of the sun in the sky. He frowned before turning back to investigate the lair. It wouldn't take him very long to realize that he was inside of a Sith location, something that he shouldn't have been able to find. While Vader had found this location by utilizing the Republic shuttle's no-go zone planets. There were separate lists inside of every shuttle database. Some locations were for both Jedi and clones, others specified for Jedi. The Knights of the Republic were allowed to travel to neutral systems, and at this point in the war, CIS territory. It was a perk of being a Jedi, so the no-go zones were typically planets with a Sith past or had no relevancy to the current times. This current system was one of them. Vader had used this list in the moments he awoke over Coruscant to pick a system and disappear. Anakin didn't know any of this because he didn't remember it, but he found himself a crystal, a Sith holocron if you will. Its blinding crimson light lit the room, and he walked up to it. His hands fell over the top of it, and the power within the device sunk into his skin. The power of the dark side was nearly imbued into him, so with a pull of his hand, he removed the device out of curiosity. Just as he did, his saber was flung into his hands and activated. A defense system, created by the Sith, transformed the room into a death trap. Anakin readied himself, leaping over spikes and deflecting blaster shots from the walls. His wounds, which hadn't been treated in over 24 hours by this point, started to act up. His adrenaline kept him moving, as he skipped between more traps and eventually used the Force to shatter the wall and flip out the side of the structure. He spun around as the top of the pyramid started to crumble. Noticing the steep drop, Anakin decided to leap up the side of the structure, avoiding the planned avalanche with the trap of bricks and stones. He landed on the top of the structure, now completely clear, and fell to his side, catching his breath as a cloud of dust shot up into the air. It was time for him to find home. Well, he wouldn't. About 5 months later, he still hadn't found that home. Anakin was self-sabotaged by himself. Vader was on an unknown mission. Skywalker tried to make contact with his alter ego by leaving a message on the holopad, but Vader ignored it. He actually used the holopad to get everything he wanted. Only problem was the fact that he didn't change the password, so Skywalker locked Vader out and had to live with the consequences of living in the shadow of his alter ego. They had bounced around numerous star systems, as Vader searched thoroughly for more power. In a way, Anakin's own struggles multiplied. He was isolated, stuck with a lurking cloud over his head, waiting to rain down on him at any moment. His only friend and consolation was R2, but he couldn't stop Vader from tormenting the astromech. If Anakin released R2, Vader would tie him back up. R2-D2 tried to help Anakin, but there simply wasn't anything he could do until he got the proper psychological help. They were, again, on another unknown planet. Also, it mustn't be misconstrued. Anakin had tried to escape, but so frequently he was weakened and tired. This creature that existed on the other side of him drained his body, so every time he tried to be physically active, following a split, Anakin felt too weak to even press forward. This was due to the intense regimens of training that Vader did with himself, plus Vader's use of the dark side and the holocrons they stole together. Vader used this tactic to make himself as strong as possible, while also limiting Anakin's resistance as best as he could. Vader was determined to find one resolution and become one thing. Anakin could tell that it was building towards something, but he couldn't, in theory, stop it. Whatever they were doing together would either save them or destroy them. There was no in between. This time, though, when Anakin woke up, he was inside of a massive cave. The darkness covered his body. The only light, in general, was from the Sith holocrons gathered beside him. He breathed heavily, as if he had been defeated. Anakin adjusted himself. His bones creaked with each move, and his muscles tensed as he picked everything up and put it into a backpack. Unlike his other personality, he would meet someone Vader had been searching for. From the roof of the cavern, a creature that blended in with everything in the environment displayed itself. Anakin felt her immediately and backed up, dropping his belongings and stumbling. The monstrous animal watched him curiously, before asking why he felt so different through the Force. There was a certain switch in the essence. The animal knew better than to interact with Vader. She'd been watching the split personality swing his lightsaber until he dropped with a thud. Anakin was much different. His movements, his mannerisms, even his voice. All of them were stark contrasts to whatever entered her home. The creature displayed no sense of fear, just no interest in combat, yet. Anakin confessed the truth without even trying to hide it. He was tired, and he wanted to be free from this pain. Whatever battles mounted inside of his head, he didn't want to face them anymore. He didn't know that the Jedi had stopped searching for him. He didn't know how despondent Padme had become. And lastly, he was unaware of Obi-Wan's and Sidious's desperation when it came to finding him. He'd been alone for 5 whole months, fighting demons inside of his head that he couldn't see, let alone stop. Anakin asked if this creature would mind eating him, and she lay down across the floor in front of him, still towering over his much smaller figure. With a shake of her head, the answer was given, and he plopped down, looking in her direction, asking then what he could do about it. The animal, named Gorva, didn't know. She didn't typically concern herself with outsiders. As she revealed, she was simply an animal connected to the Force. Her purpose was to protect these caverns. What lay inside she did not reveal. That was perhaps the secret and the gift of secrets. Gorva was similar to the great Bendu of Atalon, though she was a little less morally ambiguous. She preferred to act rather than to hide, but she had displayed a little bit of hypocrisy with Vader because she didn't act. But there also was no method for Vader to obtain the secrets of these caves. He would aimlessly wander around because Vader was an instrument of darkness. Only a vessel of light could find the path, as she said. Anakin wished to know, but he did not verbally communicate that. He just nodded his head, and the conversation naturally progressed. Gorva learned more about his predicament, and she insisted on giving him some advice. She had sensed the tug and pull when Vader entered. She knew that Vader wasn't just a dark adept, that there was something else within, which most Sith typically did not carry. He listened, and he appreciated actually being heard for once. He'd been stuck with himself, descending further into madness with each passing day. All of his memories were vanishing, and thus Gorva asked him to come hither. He walked closer towards her, and she extended one of her long arms, instructing him to place his hand on top of it. In that instant, they connected, and he was transported back to the memories he had lost connection to. The light side was a gift. He needed to resist whatever this split was doing to him. It wasn't something that he needed to give up and let destroy him. Anakin listened attentively as she started to give him instructions. This would be Anakin's method of both self-preservation and saving himself. She provided him the tools. Whenever Vader showed himself, she'd vanish from his sight, camouflaging within the walls and waiting for Anakin to return. Part of her reasoning for not hurting Vader, aside from her inability to access the secrets, was because she could sense that Vader was not the individual's truest self. However, there was something that concerned her greatly. In the way that Vader had gotten in the way of Anakin from returning home, he had the chance to repay a favor. The dark version of Skywalker was attempting to create a portal with his Sith holocrons. He planned to use it to do a multitude of things. Firstly, Vader wished to be the true emperor of a Sith order. He'd murder the current Sith in their sleep so that he could assume command over whatever power they held. He would then utilize said portal to remove any sort of Jedi, witch, or Force user that posed any threat to him. The final key to exposing that power that went along with every holocron they had collected should be within this cave. It was far-fetched, but Gorva listened to what Anakin could not hear, and because Vader knew R2 would tell Skywalker everything, and didn't know that Gorva was watching him, he spoke aloud to himself, because R2 was still inside the shuttle. This was Vader's most efficient way of keeping secrets from his light side self, keeping R2 out of the picture. Of course, Vader was so blinded by his rage that he never knew there was another neutral being emanating from above him. Anakin's time awake consisted of feeling out the muscle memory he attained from all of Vader's practices. He could still do it, he just didn't remember learning it. He'd specialize in harmonizing with himself, with the Force, and with Gorva. But Vader quickly recognized this, and resorted to torturing himself. Due to the dark side feeding off of pain, Vader would physically harm himself to empower his own gifts. Anakin, therefore, was forced to stop attempting to fight back. Vader's personality didn't really care what happened to the body, it was just a temporary vessel. But Anakin certainly cared a lot about what happened to his body, so it was a very quick way for Vader to stop Anakin from interfering. Because Gorva was the first individual sentient Anakin had interacted with in months, he formed a connection almost instantly with her. This bond was close to mother and son, because of her incredible age. She was older than Yoda by a couple thousand years. The neutrality of creatures like this permitted them the chance to survive for so long. But there was also something else. This wasn't a one-sided relationship. Skywalker just didn't know that at the moment. What Gorva was waiting for was the Sith. The secrets she protected were once discovered by the Sith, and she waited for their return. Anakin was working with her through the Force. While psychotherapy and cognitively identifying traumas would have been the resolution, this was still an animal. They didn't have those methods, and she was a beacon of the Force. She utilized that. The Jedi certainly didn't have those methods either, but at least she provided tactics that assisted him emotionally and mentally. Skywalker's split instances started to decrease. Whatever trigger caused his mind to snap slowly started to fade away. He needed to break free, and desperation drove him to the edge, but it may have been too late. The Sith holocrons and the work of Vader was basically lighting a beacon for the Sith. Vader wasn't trying to bring them to the cave, not yet, because he was searching for the secret to the cave. If he could just find the last piece of the puzzle, he could kill the Sith by opening a portal to finding each of them. Of course, Gorva wouldn't hurt Anakin because he wasn't what she wanted. She recognized that Vader and Anakin were two different people the second they stepped in. Well, in their search for young Skywalker, Sidious and Tyrannus on the other side of the galaxy followed the beacon lit by Vader to this cave. It was actually Vader who was the functioning individual when the Sith entered the cave. The Dark Adept was bleeding the holocron into his veins. It sent a shockwave through his body, and when the sounds of lightsabers caught his attention, he turned back. Vader's voice ached with darkness. Sidious and Tyrannus were both surprised. Both were wearing hoods over their heads to protect their identities. They couldn't believe that it was young Skywalker that they found, activating a Sith beacon. It had become widely accepted, pretty much, aside from Obi-Wan and Padme, that Anakin was not coming back. Sidious was actually looking for potential replacements in the highly likely chance that Skywalker did not return. So they watched the Jedi Knight ignite his lightsaber as blood dripped from his wrist down into the blazing light. It sent ripples through the saber itself, and the two Sith agreed to take Anakin down, not kill him, and they would deal with this later. Their weapons moved in. Vader slipped between his opponents, swinging aggressively at each of them. Vader immediately felt in control, because he assumed he was too powerful for them. He swiped his blue weapon at the Sith, and they deflected where they could, using agility and mastery to keep their distance. In Vader's mind, they were afraid of him. Never did it cross his mind that they wanted him alive on purpose. Though more of Vader's personality showed throughout this engagement. From above the duel, Gorva watched in anticipation. Their weapons slammed together in the middle, and Vader ruptured the ground beneath Sidious's feet with the Force, and the Sith Lord stumbled backwards. The Dark Adept ripped his saber back around and started aggressively pursuing Dooku. As their weapons clashed, Vader disappeared, and Anakin stumbled towards Dooku, raising his weapon at the last second and defending himself before falling backwards. Sidious and Tyrannus got by each other's sides, and looked down at Skywalker. As Dooku raised his hand to fire electricity, Anakin pressed his hand behind him on a stone. He closed his eyes, and time itself slowed down. It was a method he and the Beast had practiced. The moment the electricity fired from his hands, Anakin, using the muscle memory of Vader and the training of Gorva, rose to his feet and parried the electricity, spinning through its blinding light and striking at the Sith apprentice. Sidious moved to get in the way to stop Skywalker, but the monstrous creature descended from seemingly the heavens as she jabbed a fistful of talons through Palpatine's back. His robes and skin shredded apart as he wheezed in pain. Skywalker parried Dooku, and with Vader's strength, shoved the Count's weapon into the ground, and with a swift pull, cut right through Dooku's face, launching him backwards and into the ground. Anakin turned to see Sidious jabbing his lightsaber at Gorva. The beast hissed and maneuvered away from his attack before Anakin thrusted his saber at the Dark Lord. Palpatine, just moments away from being killed, slipped the strike and pulled Anakin downwards to the ground. He fired electricity at the Force creature, and Gorva's massive hand palmed the fiery light. It was absorbed by the beast, and Anakin slapped his saber through one of Sidious's knees, and before he could fall, he was eaten alive. Dooku would in the next few moments experience the same fate. It was here, finally here, where Anakin could attempt to break free. R2 was inside the shuttle. It was a distance from the cave, but now that the cave was safe, Gorva grabbed Anakin and rushed him to the starship so he could make his escape. Like many other similar attempts to escape Vader, he'd lose consciousness midway through their trip through hyperspace, but this time, finally this time, his shuttle would be apprehended by a passing acquaintance, utilizing his tractor beam to capture the ship, and it waited for Jedi reinforcements. The tragedy of Anakin's experience with Gorva is that it wasn't as positive as he thought it was. She could have helped him escape for the longest time, but she didn't. She was, after all, a neutral entity. While yes, utilizing the light, she also harvested off the dark. The secret mentioned within her caves was not a real thing. There was no portal to teleport across the galaxy. That was a fantastical trick used by Sith of the pre-Banite era. Long before the rule of two was ever established, a Sith Lord stumbled upon Gorva, and she almost killed him. For sparing his life, he promised to bring her offerings, so that he could become a Sith King one day. She accepted that deal, because it was nothing but a myth, created to lead unsuspecting Sith rivals to their deaths. The map utilized by Vader was one of 17 different pathways to this cave. Only 3 of them remained in the galaxy. The pre-Banite Sith Lord had fulfilled his promise to Gorva, though he never did become a Sith King. He would actually be killed by his apprentice, long before he ever found that rank. Gorva wasn't inherently selfish, but she also wasn't above helping someone to get something in return. Goodness is not about getting a gift from aid, but she again was a neutral entity. Perhaps less neutral than the Great Bendu. The old Sith trick to earn one-man power would be the destruction of the Sith. Without Vader's training, Anakin's muscle memory, and Gorva's support, Skywalker and thus Vader may have been consumed by the Sith Lords on that planet. When the Jedi reached the Republic light cruiser, they had to completely subdue Anakin because he was acting like a maniac. They didn't understand that the individual they ran into was not Anakin, it was Vader. But when he woke up in restraints, he'd have the chance to explain everything to them as Anakin. Obi-Wan would be the first one to be there for him. He'd also be the Jedi Master to visit Gorva and graciously thank her for protecting Skywalker. She was always happy to assist. The secret of her cave would not be forgotten. The Jedi would actually utilize it for future dark adepts, individuals who craved too much power and couldn't stop themselves from harming others. This was not a mutually beneficial deal. This was one of gratitude from Obi-Wan, behind the Council's back. Gorva would, in her life, in the future, enjoy meals including the likes of the Knights of Ren, the Acolytes of Beyond, Maul, and a couple of other loose maniacs with a gift for the Force. Skywalker, though, would not be out of his personal hell. Working and walking through life with a split personality wasn't a treat, and it was arduous. Every waking moment was turning his head to make sure the shadow wasn't creeping up behind him. In these revelations, both presented by Anakin and Gorva, the Jedi Order would bring in several aides to help Anakin, though perhaps the most important help to his cause were Obi-Wan and Padme. They assisted him with identifying his memories, managing the sudden behavioral changes that came with the split, and finally, merging those personalities into one. No matter how separated on the spectrum of light and dark they were, Anakin and Vader were of the same mind. They were of the same body. Similarities did exist. Anakin slaughtered the Tusken Raiders, just as Vader was equipped enough to handle mechanics with ease. The merging of the split would take Anakin years, and as it is with split personality, it doesn't really ever go away. But in managing it, surrounded by people he loved, he could finally live a life as himself. No more disruptions from Vader, and in silencing that split, Anakin also removed the clouds of depressive episodes, and came to peace with the traumatic moments in his life. As Skywalker was managing this in his first few days to weeks to months back, there was an important treaty being signed, because without Dooku or Palpatine, a peace treaty could be finalized. This all happened and took place before Palpatine and Dooku could stage the Coruscant power grid bombing, and Grievous simply did not have the influence or wherewithal to put an end to a treaty. He'd also be a bit of a loose cannon without Dooku. Trench, due to surviving Christophsis without injury, would challenge Grievous, for he had gone mad. There'd be a power struggle between Captain Mar Tuk from Ryloth, Admiral Trench, and General Grievous. This over-communication bickering eventually turned into a fallout, and a battle that would consume the Separatist military. Though, even with the Sith destroyed, the Republic would not unify. It would simply become two separate governments, and the Confederacy would struggle as a result. Dooku set them up to fail, because the entire military operated out of a Council of Republic representatives. It would turn into a long, drawn-out argument in the galactic political landscape for years, but eventually, after nearly a decade or so, the Confederacy and Republic would operate freely without influence from major corporations. Padme and Anakin, in their own personal lives, would start a family once they both reached their 30s. Anakin had since retired from the Jedi Order, but he was frequently watched over by the Order. He and Padme would also visit Gorva from time to time. But Anakin's case would also be a lesson to the High Council, that they needed to watch over their members. Therapists and caretakers would be brought into the Order to assist the Jedi with their struggles. The Jedi Order, and therefore High Council, would also ensure Skywalker had regular checkups, protecting him and his family for the rest of their lives. And that, my friends, is our story, and special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So, this one's a little heavy, and I really don't think you can do a split personality without it being heavy. I personally just wanted to do this the right way, so you can see it right here on the screen. I actually did a little test to frame how I wanted to perceive Anakin in the story by going through the test obviously on screen, but to also just kind of get into the mind of someone that's going through this. And I use a lot of symbolic wording here to kind of frame Vader almost as depression as well. I think like the split personality where they completely like just deride him of joy, and it was really hard to cover that, but it also is kind of triumphant. This story specifically is meant to kind of feel like really twisted. For example, you don't know Vader's motivations for like the first half of the video, and that's very intentional. Same with the whole, the cavern where Gorva is. That's all meant to be very mysterious. And part of that reason is I want all of us, as we're experiencing this story, to kind of feel like Anakin. You know, he doesn't really know what's going on, and only that clarity starts coming through in the end, inside that cave, because Gorva's helping him through that. I also like the idea of using Gorva. I used I think it was a dragon from that movie Damsel from Netflix, I don't know. I used that creature as like the Bendu was like more of like a neutral gray or dark kind of creature, an individual that acts more viciously towards the Sith. I like the idea of having an individual that's interacted with the Sith and kind of just like harvests them, like kind of harvest their power, but like from the light side perspective. So I guess like a light side Nihilus or something like that. But I really wanted Gorva to be the anchor of the story, but also for you to feel that like Gorva isn't exactly a good guy. You know, she's kind of there to help Anakin find himself, but she's also in it for herself. She's like Jack Sparrow in a way. Like, if she wasn't getting anything out of it, I don't really see a reason for her to help Anakin, and she might just be like, sorry, better luck next time, or just eat him. And that's kind of what I wanted you to feel with Gorva, is that like, oh my gosh, she's helping him, but she also doesn't really care. Otherwise though, I wanted to really try and stay true to the whole split personality thing. I wanted to like be serious with it. I mean, it's not like, you know, I didn't want to like totally screw up the whole split personality thing. I think it has to be semi-serious. Like, I don't want to be like, oh, he gets fucked up like every other day. Isn't that funny? Like, no, not really. And I kind of wanted to cover that. I also plan on doing something similar with Sidious at some point, or Sidious/Palpatine at some point, because I think that'd be very interesting. This one is definitely more from a spiritual, emotional, mental perspective, and I think you could take that with Palpatine with being more political, emotional, and mental as well. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. Definitely more serious in tone, but in a way wholesome, in a way very mysterious. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.